Warning: this review contains minor spoilers for Subnautica and major spoilers for Below Zero. Subnautica Below Zero is a sequel to Subnautica that came out 3 years after the original. It follows a different protagonist on a different part of the same planet, and seems to be one of a growing number of games I've experienced in the last 5 years that are so similar to their predecessors, I genuinely believe the game started life as a DLC. Now, there's nothing wrong with that in theory, but the sequel has to be a net improvement on the original to feel like a satisfying experience. Below Zero starts off strong in this regard, by quickly showcasing some excellent visual design upgrades. Now, the different types of stone you can hit for resources tells you what they might contain before you interact with them, and perhaps even more importantly, have a very particular hue, which makes it very easy to locate particular minerals you need at a pretty quick glance. Table coral, an incredibly useful flora that used to sometimes be hard to find due to it blending in with other flora, now glows a luminous red, making it far more difficult to miss. Sure, one could argue that these conveniences come at the expense of immersion, but the trade-off is more than worth it in this case. When reviewing a sequel, it feels pretty hard not to compare it with the original, especially when they are so similar. This is a problem for Below Zero, because apart from the aforementioned improvements to visual design, Below Zero feels inferior in almost every way. Don't get me wrong, Below Zero still has a lot to like about it, it's just not as good. Below Zero has a great atmosphere, Subnautica's was just better. Below Zero has a mostly satisfying progression system, Subnautica's was just better. I think that's been my biggest takeaway from this playthrough. If what makes a game great was put on a big board of sliders, pretty much all of them would have been turned down for Below Zero. One of the causes of this, I believe, is the story, which plays out in a much more conventional way in Below Zero, with a much higher number of in-engine cutscenes to push the plots along. There are 3 main storylines in Subnautica Below Zero, which I have coined as the Sam storyline, the Marguerite storyline, and the Alien storyline. The Sam storyline is what brings your character here in the first place. Sam is the protagonist's sister, and we need to find out how and why she died. This, in and of itself, provides a pretty well used but more than adequate reason for a person to want to go to the planet. But the immediate problem here for me is that the protagonist wants to be here. One of the things that made Subnautica so immediately immersive and scary is that you weren't even supposed to be there. Your ship crash landed, and ultimately all your character wants to do is survive long enough to be able to leave. Neither of these masterful additions to the unnerving atmosphere are present, as the planet shows multiple signs of significant scientist population until recently. Although where they are now is a mystery that's not really hinted at. If they left, why did they leave such a mess? If they died, where are their remains? And why do none of the logs hint at them being in danger? I get that the game tries to tell you that they all left due to a sabotage attempt, but I'm sorry, I'm just not buying that. If that were true, don't you think a big company like Altera, that clearly has enough stake in the planet to send multiple teams of scientists, would send some sort of military attachment after the attack? Any semblance left of being all alone on an inhospitable planet is utterly shattered with the introduction of the very much alive Marguerite Mellar, one of the 3 who originally survived the crash of the Degassi. This unfortunately constitutes a cardinal sin for a sequel for me, as it cheapens an element of the original, at least in my opinion. Marguerite clearly dying in the jaws of a Reaper in Subnautica is a badass way for a cool character to die. The fact she survived is not only unbelievable to an unreasonable degree, it feels almost disrespectful to the original. If you're not sure what I mean, think of the Matrix trilogy. The first film on its own is a masterpiece, but the sequels change enough of the underlying lore that after you watch them, the original just isn't as perfect. I think what's most frustrating about Marguerite's inclusion in Below Zero is that it being her doesn't add anything to the story. Yeah, you get a few PDA entries that detail her unlikely escape from Oblivion, but all she does is tell you to f*** off. Then later, when you do her a favour, she lets you scan some of her things, none of which feel important to the story and are just nice to have. This character could easily have been replaced with a new, never-seen-before character, and both games would have been better for it. But honestly, I feel like there being a character here at all could just be surgically removed from the game and not negatively impact it at all. It doesn't even end in a satisfying way, as just as it feels like you might be making friends with her, she stops talking to you at all, and what could have been a storyline that at least somewhat redeems itself is just suddenly over, with no warning. This leaves me with the Alien storyline, which sees your character become host not only to an architect, but the architect responsible for the outbreak of the Kara bacterium. This requires a bit of a suspension of disbelief, but not a huge one. This alien, who is amusingly given the name Alan, is placed in your character's brain, so he can give you lots of little pointers for where to go. And so, Below Zero feels like a much more guided experience than the original, with random waypoints just appearing on your screen at seemingly random moments before you even meet Alan. Subnautica did this with the radio and life pods, which fit perfectly into the story and made the player feel like they were exploring to uncover a mystery. In Below Zero, it felt more like being pulled along for a ride. Come here, come see this. Where in Subnautica, I felt like I was being gently pushed in the right direction, in Below Zero, I felt like I was being pulled, almost dragged along, until late game, by which time I was so used to being told where to go, I got really confused and didn't know what to do, even though all I really had to do was explore, something I had no problem with in the original. The thing is, Marguerite's storyline isn't the only one with an unsatisfying ending. While at least the other two actually have conclusions, the conclusion of the Sam storyline seems to be that she developed a cure for Kara, but then hid it because she felt like Altera, the company she works for, is bad, based on basically zero concrete evidence. Then she dies in a mostly unrelated accident as a result of her own negligence, leaving the cure, which could literally save billions of lives, unknown. This makes her seem really stupid, and doesn't make much sense. The alien doesn't fare too well in this regard either. Alan makes it clear that they were on this planet looking for a cure for Kara. You then find the cure, the one Sam made, but then at the end, neither you nor Alan even take the cure with you. Shouldn't that have been important? Your own player character isn't any better. There are moments where Alan seems reluctant to tell the truth, and it feels like they might have some dangerous ulterior motive. But your player character just seems to trust him completely for no real reason. At one point, she even points out that he manipulated her, which he admits to, and her response is essentially, what can you do? How is that a realistic response? Also, at the end, Alan asks if the main character is sure she wants to come with him. Her response is, yes. Besides, I don't have another ride. So, are you telling me she went to planet 4546b to find out the truth about why her sister died with no plan to get back again? Does she want to die on a cold deserted planet? Are all the characters in this game morons? It certainly seems that way. What's the point of learning the truth just to die with it? And I haven't even talked about the gameplay yet. The gameplay, as you might expect, is very similar to the original. The controls are identical, the raw minerals are identical, with a few new items mostly circling the fact that you now have to deal with the cold. Something that really surprised me about Below Zero was how unbalanced the collecting felt. There were so many items to collect that just felt useless. Nickel being a good example. In Subnautica, I felt like I needed this a few times for different things. In Below Zero, I needed it exactly twice, both times for depth modules. Polyaniline I only needed once, for the final fabrication. The root pustules I also only needed for the final fabrication. And there were these important looking floating yellow things I collected a handful of in one biome, literally never used them. Though this in and of itself isn't a massive problem, It's a pretty big step in the wrong direction from the original. Also, what is with the sea truck? I kind of get they wanted something modular that could serve as both the small and nippy Seamoth and the clunky base-on-wheels convenience of the Cyclops submarine, but what they ended up with was the worst of both worlds. The Seamoth looked cool and could go anywhere. The head of the sea truck is ugly and clunky, even though it's fast. The Cyclops was fun to pilot and highly customizable with the habitat builder a viable option inside. The fully laden sea truck is a pain to pilot anywhere but large open spaces, with no cameras or sonar to help. It provides only one straight line to build, and you can't use the habitat builder. How is this anything other than a downgrade? And finally, I really have to take a moment to talk about the on-land segments. The controls of both Subnautica games to date are pretty good in water, but are fairly clunky on land. I'd say that the land segments are probably one of the weakest things in Subnautica, which stands to reason. The game is primarily about swimming deep underwater. Luckily, in Subnautica, these sections are pretty small, few, and also pretty easy. You don't have to worry about the timer ticking down until you drown when you're on land. Unfortunately, however, in Below Zero, there is an enormous land area that you have to go back to for several story beats. The island is cold, so you still have a timer until you die. The terrain is confusing, and there are plenty of big polar bear-like monsters who want nothing more than to eat you. The entire area is annoying, and the game keeps taking you back there. Why is a game whose strength is so obviously in deep water forcing me to spend so much time on land, where the controls are clunky and the mechanics annoying? Oh, and don't even get me started on those goddamn spy penguins. Why do they handle like bricks? Why are they required content? My friend who originally recommended Subnautica says he wished Below Zero came out first, because he feels that Subnautica is so good that it spoiled him for Below Zero, an inferior experience. But I disagree. Although Below Zero isn't a bad game, it is only good, and if it came first, then it likely wouldn't have got a sequel. As it stands, while Below Zero is good, the original is exceptional. The story was better, the atmosphere was better, the gameplay was better, the vehicles were better, hell, even the Leviathans are scarier. Ultimately, I think the biggest takeaway from this review shouldn't be, don't play Below Zero. It should be, go play Subnautica. Or if you already have, then go play it again. But if you have played Subnautica and loved it, but you really hate playing the same game more than once, then sure, why not pick up Below Zero? It's still fun, just don't expect it to blow your socks off like the original.